Okay, thanks for that. So I'm going to go ahead and warn everyone involved. I am the kind of ADD that I doubt I'll be able to monitor the Q&A or really anything because if I get distracted, we're all in trouble. So forgive me if I wait until the end. So hi, I'm going to start talking about Jenkins in a minute, but I thought I'd start out by telling you a little bit about me. So I am Valerie Regas. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. I've moved away a few times. I always end up back in Atlanta. I love it. I'm married to my bestie. His name's Mike. We got 3 kids. I have 2 of the coolest sisters on the planet. I'd put my sisters up against other people's family members in the Pepsi Challenge any day. And I've done judo for 24 years. So I sometimes make random references and jokes and compare things to either judo or parenthood. Just love me through it. And if you'd like a little known Val fact, that bottom picture sort of in the middle is me officiating my sister's wedding to my now brother-in-law. I actually usually just call him my brother because we only say in-law in my family if we hate you. So if you need an ordained minister, I'm your gal. Um, so yeah, I wanted to tell you a little bit about me. Mostly, I would like to tell you that I do not have a computer science degree. I am fairly new to this industry. I'm 3 years into my career after doing the coding boot camp at Georgia Tech. Now, that was a web development boot camp, and I learned a very important lesson there. I learned that I did not want to do web development, which, thank goodness it only cost $10,000 to find that out. Turns out I really enjoyed helping my classmates, the other people in the cohort, deploy their work, especially when they were, buggy deploys. And I kind of fell in love with the sort of mental gymnastics around start scripts and how to make everything just work. And I was at a mentoring event about halfway through my boot camp, feeling a little bit frustrated, especially because I genuinely hated front end development. Like I really just, it's not my jam. And I met this guy named Tobias, and he was asking me what I did like about technology, and I started telling him the things that I was enjoying, and he said, "Well, look, I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but you need to research DevOps because people who enjoy DevOps are really weird, and I think you would love it." And, that's fair. I know who I am as a person. I was not offended. And it's true. I did 5 hard years as a stay-at-home mom before going to the boot camp. It was the hardest job I've ever had in my life. And I've been a bar bouncer. I got to tell you, my toddler daughter she was scarier than anyone I had to fight as a bouncer. Um, but even as a stay-at-home mom, looking back, I found ways to automate my family life, and everything had to be systematic and organized, and it actually makes a lot of sense. So I got into DevOps after the boot camp, and I was with Airbus for 3 years. Awesome company. They are hiring a few engineers right now. And I just started at Salesforce 2 weeks ago, also on a hiring spree. Feel free to reach out to me if there's a role you'd like more information about. Um, all of that to say, I'm here now, years later, after a really weird educational and life journey, and I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. So, looking forward to sharing some with y'all. Um, so let's talk about like the whole point of this talk, right? So Jenkins is a tool. We'll get to that in a minute. But what we're really talking about is automation today. And for those who are sort of new to development, full disclosure, I did kind of format this talk through bootcamp grads and non-DevOps engineers, people who, might want to use Jenkins on an open source project. That's their personal, sort of passion project. So I am going to go over a little bit about automation. So why do we automate things? I, as an incredibly inherently lazy person, love the concept of automation for efficiency. As it turns out, anything that you can do to save time is going to be a huge payoff in the long run. I actually got into an argument once with someone about whether DevOps engineers should be considered billable resources. And the whole thing was, well, you're not producing code. You're not building features. And it's like, well, if I automate a manual task and over the course of a month, save various other resources, hours upon hours of time doing things, I should be billable. Automation is great, right? Not just to save you time, but to encourage consistency. So, obviously there's a lot of human error that happens in development, and never more in my life has this been more on display to me than after I had my last child about a year and a half ago. I had to go back to work at 6 weeks. That was how long I had for maternity leave. And for those of you who don't have children, I don't want to ruin the surprise, but you don't sleep. And it just depends on the kid whether you go 6 months or 6 years without sleep. Who knows? It's just a gamble. And there's a reason that as a world, if you really want to torture someone, the first thing you do is take away their sleep. That's like POW rule number one: take away sleep. Sleep is so important. And I can remember going into the office shortly after having Tyrion, and yeah, that's right, I named my son Tyrion. Again, love me through it. This is what happens when nerds have children. But yeah, like I went in, and I mean, I'm saying 8-9 months later, I was still finding bugs that I introduced into our code because I wasn't sleeping. That's a drastic example, but you never know with human error, like who's having a rough time, who just lost a family member, who's going through a breakup, who's just distracted by anything going on in this crazy world right now, right? Automation is the key to overcoming, to a large extent, the human error issue. And so what can we automate? Well, you don't have to deal with huge feature releases. You can constantly be updating your code base for fixes and things like that. And that can be an automated process. Obviously, your build and deploy pipeline, that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm probably going to harp and say the word testing like a million times, but testing. But really all the things. I mean, you can automate custom error messages, and we're going to talk about how to do that within Jenkins. Pretty much any process that you do one time manually, if you go to do it a second time manually, don't do it. Automate it in some way, script it out, find some way. Like, you should never do something more than twice. So we're gonna talk about Jenkins in particular, but really we're talking about automation, efficiency, and having more time away from work. So why Jenkins, right? The clear answer should be because it's the best tool out there, but that is not in fact true. There's no such thing as the best tool. Jenkins is an open source. They do have an enterprise version as well, but we're going to talk mostly about the open source today. It's a great tool, but it is one of many CI/CD tools. It is something that I have used for the last 3 years. So I'm obviously going to feel more comfortable discussing it than a tool I've never used except for maybe on a personal project. But the thing is, I can't even say that Jenkins isn't the best CI/CD tool. I tend to go with there's the best tool for a given problem, not a general best framework, best whatever. I will say that the community around Jenkins sets it apart for me. And I am of a temperament that I assume any new framework I use, any new technology I use, I'm going to have tons of questions. I'm not going to understand some things. There's going to be things I don't know, and I'm going to run into bugs, right? So I am particularly looking for, especially in an open source project, I'm looking for community support. What is your documentation like? And how kind, helpful, and knowledgeable are your community members? And so from that front, I will say Jenkins is delightful. The documentation is so incredibly thorough that I actually ran into issues when I first wrote this talk, because I could find the same answer in 7 different places in the docs without really trying. And so that's awesome. Like, that's just awesome. I will say it's just one tool. So again, I was gearing this talk towards, maybe you're new to, doing an automated build pipeline. Maybe you're new to deploying your own stuff. Maybe you're just looking to try a new skill. That's cool. Try Jenkins and then try other things, right? Try Circle CI, try other frameworks and form your own opinions. However, super selfish, I'm choosing this one because this is what I've worked with. All right, so throughout this talk, several times, I'm going to talk about CI and CD. Now, the only reason we're going over this is because I hear a lot of argument sometimes at conferences, especially when drinks are involved, about the meaning of CD and if it's a good goal. So we're just going to confirm my intended meaning of these phrases just for reference. So continuous integration, constantly merging changes into a central repo. What does that look like if you're a developer? This is a worthy goal by my estimation. It is a worthy goal that as a developer, I create a branch off of whatever the primary development single source of truth branch is. I make a small increment of change. I change something, some discrete thing within the code. Add commit push to my feature branch. And the minute that that branch gets merged into that single source of truth, it should already have had a fair amount of testing done on it, both tests I wrote and then tests that a tool like Jenkins provides. And it should be so clean that I don't have to worry about it going straight to dev. Continuous integration isn't putting new code into production. It is constantly having every change that is tested, that works, that's a good small change, going into your primary source of truth. Continuous delivery, right? This is what I think is the sweet spot. Continuous delivery is like you could deploy your changes right now. So what does that look like? Well, we just went through that workflow where as a developer, I've gotten my code in, it's in this single source of truth, it's in that branch. And now it has automatically, thanks to Jenkins or whatever tool you're using, it has gone through your build and package, your test cycles. It's gone through deployment to your dev environment. Maybe you have a dev, a qual, a prod, or 12 other environments, but it's gone through all of those environments sequentially as it should, but it stops right before production. Now, why do I think this is a good goal? Well, for a lot of reasons. One, there are people who work all night because of reasons, but especially since COVID, there are people that I know that get up super early, work for a few hours, then they have to deal with their kids for a few hours, then they work for a few hours, then they have to deal with their kids for a few hours. People who are on distributed teams and they're across different time zones sometimes find it's easier to start working at 1 PM when their coworkers wake up, and then they work until 10 or 11. So if every single code change is going straight to prod, you're potentially running into either a workaholic or someone on a different schedule pushing to prod in the middle of the night, and now all of our pagers are blowing up. I'm not a fan of that. I also think it's a good idea because of things like holding back features or making sure that your end user is sort of adequately prepared for a feature change that's coming. I think it's a good idea to be able to say, you know what, we're not going to deploy this until this particular day because I want to have a few customer meetings or whatever, like only you know your software. But just another control point. And then 3, while again, by my estimation, the whole goal in DevOps culture and sort of adopting these practices and principles into development is that you could deploy to prod at 4:45 on a Friday afternoon and no one loses their weekend. Like, to me, DevOps is all about having more of your life outside of work. So putting, a sort of milestone that has to be passed, a human checkpoint where an actual human being has to say, okay, everything's gone through dev and the other environments. We've stopped at the gate to production, except let's do this. And you can do it when you've got a team there to make sure everything works. Great. The other CD people talk about is continuous deployment. Now, this is very YOLO. This is very Wild West. When it comes to like a personal project, I think that continuous deployment is obviously a fine idea. It's a personal project. Unless you're monetized or you have users dependent upon you, it's fun. Just go straight to prod. It'll be fine. However, and I've tried, guys, I've tried to find a use case at an enterprise level where this makes sense, and I can't. Like, I cannot wrap my head around it. And maybe this is the PTSD talking. Maybe this is just because I'm a worrier. Maybe it's the thing inside of me that loves writing disaster recovery plans. But this terrifies me. So when I talk about CI/CD, I'm talking about continuous integration and delivery. That's the whole goal of what we're about to start learning. And Jenkins is how we're going to get there. Okay, so you got some options. if you want to start using Jenkins. For one thing, you can just install it to your machine. It's a pretty straightforward process. They've got a great tutorial. They hold your hand and it's super easy. It literally is download, go to the terminal, run a command, go to localhost, you're done. It's not bad. I will tell you, there have been some horror stories I've seen with the install not working quite as advertised, right? And we'll talk about that in just a second. But if you don't want to put anything on your machine, or maybe you're in boot camp still and your machine's bogged down, there is a publicly available Docker image, which you can just go pull from Docker Hub, and you can run Jenkins in that Docker container on your machine without actually downloading Jenkins. Totally lady's choice. I'm going through the download because I don't know, because I think most people still download software. I don't know. But honestly, I would love to know if I'm right or wrong about that. If you get a chance and want to like throw into QA or something like, I never download software or whatever, I'm always interested. There are a billion different options. Just get the most stable, like the current stable version for whatever works for your machine. And these instructions take you to, when you go to localhost the first time, this screen that tells you to set up using your initial admin password, your locally running instance of Jenkins. Now, why would I share this? This is a really easy instruction that I should not have to share or discuss, right? Because we all do this for a living, right? Wrong. So this is one of the few things that I've noticed can be kind of quirky about the initial Jenkins setups. I had no problem having that path written there because that's not at all where my initial admin password was the first time I set it up. It was kind of wonky. I ended up having to go through a little bit anal retentively through terminal and like find this initial password. If you lose this password, you can't set it up. So the good news is there is a lot on Stack Overflow about places people have found the initial admin password if it doesn't install where it's supposed to. You can always, ls-la within terminal and just kind of dig through likely suspects and the different sort of trees where it could be. In theory, it's where it says it is, but if it's not, just know you're probably not insane or messing up anything. This is one of the quirks that I did run into myself on one of my machines, and then have seen a lot of people complain about this as a fairly constant issue. Okay. So we're going to create a project. Now, there are a few different kinds of projects. I am partial to what's called a multi-branch pipeline. We're going to talk about that. This is the Jenkins GUI. And it's so funny. I had to mark out a bunch of stuff because while it was still the open source version, there was some work stuff, but I promise there's nothing sexy under the gray box or nothing. You're missing nothing. But Jenkins does have a GUI. Now, everything can be done via command line as well. For the purposes of an informational talk where we're on Zoom, and I think we're all pretty much experiencing Zoom fatigue, I figured the GUI would be more attractive than sharing terminal shots. But you can do everything through command line if you want. If you're going to use the GUI, I'm going to give you two pieces of advice. One, this boring black and white one, use this one. It's not as attractive. If you look along the left-hand side of the screen towards the middle, it says Open Blue Ocean. Blue Ocean is an alternative GUI, same basic functionality, but it's updated and more attractive. However, as a dyslexic person, I really struggle to look at the screen and see what's going on. There's a lot of white letters on bright backgrounds. If you're colorblind, I would avoid it like the plague because everything's red and green and right next to each other. It would be very hard to decipher the Blue Ocean GUI. If you have any accessibility issues, it's pretty, but I hate it. I would much rather have something functional that is utilitarian and maybe not as attractive. That's fine. So this is the GUI that we're gonna look at for this talk, but do know that there's a Blue Ocean GUI out there that is very pretty. And if you don't have any accessibility issues, you might enjoy it. But for now, we're gonna start a new project. So we're gonna click on new item. And so there's two on this list that are fairly popular. The Freestyle project is ubiquitous. I mean, everyone knows how to use them. I like a good multi-branch pipeline. You've got options. I would highly recommend that you look at which of your projects you're looking to get into a pipeline and like what you're looking to automate, and then maybe do just 10 minutes worth of research on the kind of project that might be best for you. But for the purposes of today, we're talking about multi-branch pipelines. Again, because we talked about, merging a feature branch into a primary source of truth branch and multi-branch pipeline. So again, only you will know what's right for your personal projects. This is what we're talking about. Okay, so add source. This is cool. Now, I actually realized just recently I left out one step from this. So forgive me if I kind of tangent for a second. But once you have said, okay, I'm going to call it test project and it's a multi-branch pipeline, it takes you to some configs. So when you add a source, you can choose Git or GitLab, you can choose GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, like whatever you're using for version control, really easy to integrate that. Some of the things that matter, if you look in the bottom right corner, you're going to see script path Jenkins file. We are going to get to Jenkins files in just a bit, but I will say Jenkins files are like the set of instructions that you create to define your pipeline in your code. Typically, your Jenkins file is going to go root level directory. If you have like a mono repo with multiple projects, you can create additional Jenkins files for different projects at the project level. And then when you're doing the configs here, instead of saying root level Jenkins file, you would say project A/Jenkins file. And you would just, have multiple projects set up within the same repository. That's one viable option. Or I'll show you in a little bit in a Jenkins file what it looks like to run parallel and carry out multiple tasks at the same time in the context of a mono repo. What matters for the time being is that you're telling it, here's where my code lives, and here's the set of instructions for which you're looking. And that's going to be that Jenkins file that's mentioned in the bottom right. So you got to make some credentials if you'd like to link to your GitHub account. Pretty easy process. You're going to go to developer settings and then create a new personal access token. There is some really good documentation around what all permissions are needed for this personal access token to communicate with Jenkins correctly. I'm not including those right now. It's a really easy Google. It's in the Jenkins docs, and there's a list of all the different permissions that Jenkins needs in order to use webhooks. Now, this is where I kind of left something out. Sorry, my bad. This last instruction has to do with putting in the name of your main repository, or rather the URL for that from GitHub. The last step that I cannot believe I forgot, on the GitHub side of things, you do have to, again, going back to developer settings, where's that? Yeah, going back to developer settings, it's not bad. You just go to webhooks, which you should have that option on your new or on your personal one. That was an enterprise account, but you just have to define that webhook. So on the Jenkins end, it's got credentials in the form of that key. It's got the link to the URL. It's listening for GitHub to tell it that some code has changed. You do have to go into your settings within GitHub and establish that webhook there as well. Mea culpa on not having a screenshot for that. I literally just hit me late last night, and well, here we are. Okay, so we defined a project. We told Jenkins where to find our code. We told GitHub it's okay to tell Jenkins that we've changed some stuff. We've got everything set up. Now what? Dun, 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 the Jenkins file. So technically Jenkins is written in Groovy, which I don't consider myself as someone who writes in Groovy because I think of Jenkins file language as different. It's like the syntax is a little different, but there are two primary syntaxes for Jenkins files: declarative pipeline and scripted pipeline. They're both quirky. Now it is thought that the declarative pipeline is more readable. it's kind of, the declarative pipeline is a little newer of a feature. They tried to make it, again, like they just wanted to give like a richer syntactical option, and then like make it more readable and a little more accessible for newer people. And that's cool. So what are we looking at here? Like, what in this declarative pipeline, what do we got going on? So that first line, pipeline, as you might have inferred, it just lets Jenkins know, hey, this is a pipeline I am defining now. Agent any, you can use a custom Docker container to do any amount of work within Jenkins, or you can say any and it'll just spin up whatever it wants. There are some cool things you can do with custom Docker images. Like, for example, if you have multiple things to build and 2 of the 3 require npm and packages of that nature, and then one of them requires like pip and Python and other things, well, you can grab a publicly available Docker image, declare it in your Jenkins file, spin it up, carry out a stage, spin it down. So there's all sorts of things you can get into with that as time goes by. But for now, we're looking at some really basic stuff. So stages. Stages are exactly what it sounds like, just units of work that need to happen. So the first stage we have defined is build, right? And then you give it some steps. You can issue shell commands. You can put bigger chunks of scripted code into a shell file and then just invoke that in your pipeline. In general, build, test, deploy. That's going to be your bare bones basic sort of steps you're going to want to talk about or address. But this is a really, really stripped down declarative pipeline. Now, what's really cool about the Jenkins documentation is, let's say that you're looking to try and figure out how to do something specific with Jenkins, and the example given is a scripted pipeline, but you're using declarative. They have set it up so you can toggle between the two, and they're very aware that you need to know both. So I did want you to see an example of declarative pipeline before we get into some scripted pipeline. So what are we looking at here? There's some pretty cool stuff going on right now. I mean, I'm actually kind of excited. So the first thing that you should see at the top is an if, a conditional, right? So if this is any branch other than master branch, let's do some stuff, right? Why is that important? Well, there are all sorts of things. I mean, if you're testing out some compute heavy changes, you might only want to run through the pipeline for a certain branch that's working on those changes, rather than rebuilding everything. Being able to say, do this for different branches is really cool, especially when it comes to where things are deploying, right? If it's this primary development branch, well, deploy it to here in Google Cloud or whatever your provider is. But if it's our primary branch, we're going to deploy over here. It's cool. It makes it really easy. The second line, it says the node label. That is actually an example of using a custom Docker image to do some work that's just defining where we're like what we're going to spin up to do the work in. Check out SCM. That is the command to check out source control, right? So that's what's telling GitHub, hey, if there have been any changes, tell me, because if I have to build, I want to do it. That is the quick and easy line that really starts that conversation with GitHub. And then our first stage, build dev, right? So this was an example of a mono repo where there were, at one point, I want to say 7 or 8 projects, but at this point in time, 6. And so they all had slightly different needs, but some similar needs. So it was really easy to say, you know what, in parallel, at the same time, look at these 6 projects, and we're going to do a stage called npm install. We're going to do it in this node container that I think was just from a publicly available npm Docker image, but spin that up. And then we're just going to say npm install for all of them, right? What does that look like? Well, we'll actually get to that in a second. What does that look like? It looks like after it has gone through and looked for source change, it's, and so this white box is an example from the console output, which if you go back to the GUI, when you go to a build to see its success or failure or details, the console output for Jenkins is awesome. It's very thorough. I almost never get useless error messages. They almost always are specific and viable. But in your console output, you can see what stage you're at, and that's, you know, what you just saw. So what's this down here? You know, this build something dev, build step, and then passing through some things. So this is an example of one of the things you can do with Jenkins, which is to write your own custom methods and then carry those out. So all we're saying is all of these needed npm install, but they have slightly different needs in that the application and environment need to be specified. So we're going to use this function and in parallel go through these build processes, do an npm run build, but specify which app and which environment. And that there were some things that had to happen along the lines of labeling and such. And so then we look at our console output and it's telling you, okay, I've spun up this container. Now in parallel, we're going to do some stuff. I've got these 6 things. So I'm spinning up 6 more containers. And then I'm going to start with my npm run build app environment. Again, the console output is really nice because if something went wrong during this time, I would know exactly where it was. Where in the course of this pipeline did the breakdown occur? Big fan. There are some things that I love about Jenkins as far as how it integrates with GitHub or GitLab or whoever you're using. For example, it will do a bunch of tests and say like this branch has no conflicts or we got some problems. Maybe merge with caution, maybe don't do that. I don't know. It's really cool the way that it kind of, you want to get to a place where everything's approved, checks have passed. And what's nice is if you look, well, maybe not. I didn't get a good example. I should have gotten a better example because there is almost always, if there's a failure, a little line that just says more information, and it'll take you to the GUI so you can dig through the console output and figure out why it's not able to be merged safely. Again, anything that provides another layer of protection and stops me from making an error without realizing it, big fan of the way it integrates with different version control providers. Some other things. Now, I've never actually done this. This is an example of writing some custom alerts and having that file in with your repository. I've never needed an alert other than I use Slack for my alerting. So I just kind of threw it into the primary Jenkins file at the end, but you can define how to be notified of your build success or failure. Maybe you'd rather be emailed. There are all sorts of integrations and choices. I think actually there's a text message one now. Like there's a lot of options. If you don't want to have this much notification, I mean, especially for a personal project, you probably don't want to be emailed, Slacked, smoke signal, texted, all the things. You can just throw, you know, a little function into your into your Jenkins file. And then at the end of each sort of step or chunk of working logic, say, hey, just let me know if this worked or not, and let me know what broke. So that is a viable option. And this is just an example of what that code looks like. It's pretty easy, but you are going to need a plugin, especially if you're going to do something like Slack or a specific third-party integration. So we're not going to talk a lot about plugins because it's 12:45 as it turns out. But I will tell you, for anything really you can imagine, there's a Jenkins plugin for it. So what does this look like? If you're deploying your personal project to Google Cloud, there are myriad plugins aimed at making it easier to integrate and deploy to Google Cloud. There's Kubernetes plugins, Docker plugins, Slack communication plugins. I mean, literally, I would be shocked if I could name 1% of the plugins available. Like, there's so many. And this is definitely something fun to explore. Plugins can be defined within that initial setup, like not for an individual project, but for your organization, for you as a user. You get plugins, you can keep them up to date, make sure everything's as it should be. I would encourage you to, especially if you're finding that you're struggling with the right syntax in particular for a specific task, there's probably a plugin that makes it easier and gives you some reserve words and just makes it easier for you to be declarative and say, this is what I need you to do, Jenkins. So final thoughts. Yeah, Jenkins is great. Is it perfect? No, but there's no such thing as perfect software because humans create it. I find Jenkins to be really easy to use on a personal project as well as at work. I was pleasantly surprised going into my first role, seeing my first Jenkins file. As overwhelming as it felt, it didn't take long for it all to make sense because it is, syntactically available and accessible. I think it's a really cool tool. I'm passionate about automation, and I hope that you can use this tool to make your life just a little bit easier. And that's all from me.
This is from an anonymous attendee. Can the Jenkins file be sourced from a different place than the application repo that's actually receiving GitHub commits?
I believe it can, but so at an enterprise level, I can see where that would be really useful. If you had a bunch of applications that all deploy in pretty much the same way, and you wanted to parameterize and have one Jenkins file, like in a config repo or something. I do believe that when you set up your project, even if it's outside of the original repository, you should be able to somehow declare that it lives elsewhere, but I don't know how to do that, to be honest, for several reasons. One, most things need to be deployed with specific utilities in specific fashions with a specific protocol. And maybe like in the context of the mono repo, they were quite similar. So it was okay to recycle some things and do it that way. But in general, your Jenkins file is so intimately tied to that project. You want it to live with that project. And again, like, especially if you have, 40 APIs, I could see if they all deploy exactly the same, having one Jenkins file and parameterizing, but you would just want to move all of them into one repository, specify that this is the one, this, upper level Jenkins file at the root is what you want to look at, and then parameterize it that way. I don't know how one would go about specifying a different repository. However, you might be able to with a freestyle project. Yeah.
Got you. Okay. All right. This is also from an anonymous attendee. This is more, I think, a career-focused or oriented question. I think I'm in a similar boat as you, Valerie, and want to know how I can get to a place to become a junior DevOps person and then, go on to a DevOps position. What are things that we should know, and what are some innate skills we should have beyond the docs? What are some good personal projects to get started with, personal equipment or setting up a personal network / office? I'm struggling to get started.
Yeah, so this is a hard one. I'll tell you how I got started. I don't think it's right for everyone. So, I mean, there's no such thing as entry-level DevOps. It's a lie. If you see a job rec that says entry-level DevOps, they probably want 3 to 5 years experience. I don't understand, but there it is. That's just where we are. I ended up getting an internship with Airbus, but it took a lot of hustle and a lot of begging, to be blunt. The first time I spoke at a conference was actually an International Women's Day event in 2018. And I got up on stage and found a way to be asked up there, gave a talk on why former stay-at-home parents have unique skill sets that should make them more desirable, not less desirable candidates. But mostly I was up there so that a room full of people could hear me say, I need an internship. Someone please make me one. And then, one night I was drinking wine and my husband said, how much have you had? And I said, 1 glass for every rejection email I got today, because that's how job hunting went. And then I thought, people drunk tweet all the time. I guess I will. And just asked for an internship. Ended up having a really great interview with a local company. But if you're looking to get started, you got a few options other than the hustle, which is definitely going to have to happen. And if you want to connect with me, we'll talk about this more. But in general, if you're looking to get into DevOps, one, you need to really understand networking. It is still a sore spot for me because I don't have that CS degree. And every time I think I understand networking protocol, I realize that there's still so much more I don't understand. So that's a constant point of study. But there are forever tutorials that are easy to find within GitHub, or whatever version control, but look for tutorials where you're hands-on actually taking something and deploying it, and look for these tutorials and challenges that focus on deploying in a Docker container to a Kubernetes cluster on a cloud provider. Like, know that process. Just deploy some of your personal stuff, right? Focus on, try a few different CI/CD tools and just see if you can get a webhook set up and get a good pipeline going. And, within your README, share maybe some screenshots of the GUI showing that everything's bright and sunny and wonderful. But honestly, I would say once it's safe to do so, network with the, the local Docker and Kubernetes groups. There's like North American DevOps group, NADOG. They do a lot of like, code and brew things. But yeah, other than that, it is 100% a hustle to try and find an internship or parlay whatever other experience you have and convince someone to give you a chance. That's a lot of it.
That's a really great answer, Valerie. And it doesn't surprise me that we got the question either. That's a very common question. And it was really nice of you to give such an in-depth answer. I think that gives hope to a lot of people. And I personally really appreciate your honesty and just being as straightforward as you are. And I think everything you said is 100% true, right? Sometimes it's just, willing to put in the work. Willing to do whatever it takes. And I also admire your courage, right? For initially getting up on stage and kind of, letting people know that you were looking for an internship. That's not always an easy thing to do for a lot of people. Let's see, I've got two more questions that I see here. This next one is from Mario. Hi, Valerie, thank you for your time today. Please excuse my ignorance, but would you say that one needs to have a good computational thinking, you put quotes around computational thinking / programming base before attempting to look at Jenkins? Thanks.
I don't like this one. Maybe. No. Okay. So again, a Jenkins file and using Jenkins is no different than using any other framework. It's understanding that you have to create a list of instructions. It's no different than writing a Docker file or even like, your package.json in like a React project and having the right start scripts. There is a certain amount of knowledge required to know what Jenkins needs to be told. Right. So you have to know where you're going to deploy and be able to tell Jenkins, send my code there, right? And do it this way. But no, I don't think it's incredibly difficult to use or requires, like algorithmic knowledge, or I think it's a fairly intuitive tool, especially when if we're talking about learning to use it on the GUI before you start using the command line. I don't know, I think it's fairly intuitive if you have pretty much any development experience.
Great answer. Let's see, this is, for pipelines, do the branches need to be in the main repo? Is there some awareness of branches and forks pull requests come from?
I do not believe so. I would actually have to look up the fork portion of that, but I will tell you that yes, so your branches do have to be in the same repo, and this is what Jenkins is listening for, right? They're listening for, this development or whatever branch you've specified. One of the examples I showed was anything other than master branch. So it's listening at those branches, and so your feature branches do necessarily have to be able to merge in. Gut instinct, I'm going to say no, that it doesn't track anything that's been forked, but I would have to verify that. I cannot think of a use case. No, I would bet money no, but I would have to verify it.
Very cool. Fair enough. Let's see, this one's from Mauricio, and this is the last one that I see. How do you submit a ticket from Jenkins to GitHub? Submitting a ticket from Jenkins to GitHub.
A ticket.
Yeah, like, he didn't clarify. Mauricio, if you want to clarify that maybe, or maybe, add a little to that question, you can do so in the Q&A stream. That's all I have on that one.
Yeah, no, if the question has to do with those webhooks, basically you have to tell Jenkins where your code lives in your version control, make sure that it has the necessary credentials to access it. Then you have to tell GitHub or whatever you're using, hey, it's okay. Jenkins is allowed to listen. Specify that in your configs there. And then it really does become automagic. Like literally, if you push changes to whatever branches that you've said, let's do this work on these branches, it just picks it up and starts doing it. And if it fails testing or something goes wrong along the way, it just abandons that build, leaves your code exactly the same as it was. But if it passes all the tests and everything, it gets rebuilt and deployed to wherever you've specified.
Very cool. Okay, so I think that's all the questions that I see. I'm going to scan Q&A one more time. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes. Let's see. Yeah, and Mauricio did elaborate just a little bit during the Jenkins build. It fails, and now you want to let the user know using a ticket. That was his clarification. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So within the GitHub GUI, and I cannot speak to GitLab on this one. I've never used Jenkins with GitLab, but with GitHub, if a build fails, there is an alert when you've done your PR before you can even merge it in. It will go through and test out that build before you even merge. And it'll say, hey, you failed some checks. You don't want to merge this new code in, it's broken. And that's where you can click, learn more, get taken over to the Jenkins GUI and dig through the console output, figure out why it failed testing. And then you can set up custom notifications. So at work, I think most people, send it to Slack or whatever the group communication tool is. If it's your own personal stuff, maybe you just put it in the Jenkins file to send you an email. So you don't have to babysit the Jenkins GUI to see if it builds or not. But yeah, as far as creating a ticket, I'm sure there's a plugin that would integrate with like Jira or something, or whatever productivity tools. I would bet money there's a plugin if you need it to interact with some sort of proprietary ticketing system. But the alerts are typically enough if your engineers just want to go fix it. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, thank you. Okay, so I think that wraps up the Q&A segment. Valerie, thank you again for speaking. Truly, truly appreciate it. You did a great job. I see a lot of thank yous and great job comments over in the chat stream. So I think everyone really agrees. Super, super good job. And I think most people really appreciate your authenticity. You're a real person. And I think, people truly appreciate that. So thank you.